That was funny.
Welcome, class. Today we're going to read The Littles and the Great Halloween Scare. We're going to read one page and then pass on. Okay. I'm going to read the first page. Lucy Little found her older brother Tom on the roof of the Biggs house. He had just picked up the day's mail from the chimney mailbox. Tom, Lucy said. She ran across the roof toward him. You promised that today we'd think about something scary for Halloween. I've been looking all over for you. Hey, look at this. Tom waved a letter. It's from Uncle Nick. There you go again, Tom. You aren't listening, Lucy said. Don't you want to have fun at Halloween?
Sure, said Tom. I love Halloween. But this letter might be important, Lucy. Uncle Nick never writes to our family. I've got to get this to Mother and Dad. Okay, said Lucy. But then we have to talk about Halloween. It's next week. Sure, said Tom. Gee, I wonder why Uncle Nick is writing to us. The 10-year-old boy walked quickly across the rooftop. He pushed a loose shingle out of place. Under it was a hole into the attic of the house. Tom climbed through the hole. 8-year-old Lucy, Tom and Lucy were 8-year-old Lucy climbed through after her brother. Tom and Lucy were two of the three children of Mr. and Mrs. William T. Little. The Littles were tiny people. They were so tiny that it was easy for Tom and Lucy to go through a hole the size of a roof shingle. Mr. Little, their father, was the tallest member of the family. He was exactly 6 inches tall.
Good job.
The Littles looked just like ordinary people except for their smallness. And in one other way, they were very different. The Littles had tails. The tiny family didn't think it was strange that they had tails. They thought it was strange that big people didn't have tails. They were born without them, said Granny Little. No one knows why. The tiny Littles lived in a snug 10-room apartment. It was inside the walls of a house owned by Mr. George Bigg. Mr. and Mrs. Bigg and their son, Henry, had no idea that tiny people lived in the house with them. Whenever the Biggs were near, the Littles stayed out of sight and tried not to make noise. This wasn't too hard for the Littles because the walls were thick enough to soften most noises, and there were passageways in the walls so the Littles could travel through the house without being seen.
Tiny people lived in many of the houses of the Big Valley. Sometimes the Littles visited with nearby tiny people, and sometimes their friends visited them. But not often. It was a long way between houses, and the neighborhood outside the houses could be dangerous. There were cats and dogs and other animals and insects ready to pounce on anything small. The Littles and their friends kept in touch mostly by airmail. The letters were delivered by Glitter, Cousin Dinky, Little
Hard.
piloted the tiny airship. His wife Della often flew with him. When the wind was blowing in the right direction, there were as many as 2 mail deliverers in a week. Tom and Lucy liked to watch the mail come in. The blue and white glider zoomed in low the houses and dropped the mail into the chimney. Mr. Little and Uncle Pete, another member of the family, had stretched a fine net over the chimney hole. The net caught
The letters, but did not keep the smoke.
the letters, but did not keep the smoke.